Well, hello again, everyone, and welcome to this very special webcast where we are joined all the way from Miami by Larry Pimentel. Now, there can be few men more qualified to talk to us about luxury cruising than Larry. Larry has held a variety of positions over the years. He's been CEO and president of Seabourn, of Cunard Line, of Sea Dream Yacht Club, and of course, most recently, we know him as CEO and president of Azamara. Now, Larry, you stepped down or you stepped aside from that role in April. We understand this is your first interview. We're very grateful for you joining us since that time. So thank you for doing that. Now, we're clearly in the middle of something you've never seen before, even in all your years. It's very, very difficult time for the industry. So we're just delighted that we can get your take and your insight and your advice. Now, one thing you said to me, which I thought was really interesting, is that the storm is always the darkest when you're in it, but there will be rainbows. Well, we want to talk about both of those aspects today. So first of all, perhaps you can talk to us about the difficulty, the pain that we're in right now, and how serious the situation is for the travel industry.
Well, first of all, thank you for the interview time. I've been excited to see you and always talking to the wonderful agents in the UK who've supported the many businesses that I've been in this really exciting and innovative industry. But indeed, it's challenged. And we have a cruise industry that's not cruising. What could be more challenging? Ports aren't open, the countries aren't open. There are fundamental challenges that need to be sorted. It requires collaboration on the part of a lot of different people. But when you think of it, we have major macro issues affecting things. And let's just go to the number one. It's the most obvious one. Obviously, COVID-19 is a pandemic that is hitting all nations, all countries, and it is closed borders, stop travel, not just in cruising, but air flights have been limited. I mean, hotels have been partially opened in places, but not entirely opened. I mean, there is a knock-on effect, a domino effect here that is fundamentally exceedingly challenged. You cannot have an industry with hundreds of millions to billion-dollar pieces of equipment who have no revenue, no guests, and no place to go. I mean, how much more challenging could this be? Having said all of that, I think there are fundamental issues that allow me to be optimistic. If you study history and you look at every downside of everything, from the point of 9/11, where people said, I won't get on a plane again, I won't fly again. And so what happens is the pendulum swings to these radical positions, and we're at the lowest of lows. But history has also taught us, even in the case of massive wars around the world, that where there is a downside, there is an upside. While the sun goes down, it also comes up. And I am a believer in the scientists of the world who will come up with a solution, because we need a pandemic solution, not only to help the cruise industry, far beyond that, to help humanity. And let's face one thing. This is maybe a time that we can all learn that working together and collaborating on the greatest of threats, which is not nuclear war, but a health pandemic, that we are one world and one people, and we must unify. And I am absolutely convinced the scientists will come up with solutions. This is beyond politics. This gets to basic science and a help of humanity. And I think that's coming our way. I wish it was coming sooner. I think it's going to be a little slower than all of us want. And I think therein lies some of the challenge.
Okay. Interesting, though, what you say about, whenever there's a downside, there's always an upside. I think for some travel agents at the moment, particularly those who are cruise specialists, it's their whole lifeblood. It's hard to see the wood from the trees at the minute. So what would be your advice to people then, if they are right in the middle of this and feeling like there's, perhaps no light at the end of the tunnel? But how do we get them through the next week, the next month? And what should they be looking at, Larry?
Boy, this is a great question. And there are people far brighter than I who've studied the psychology of downsides and things that affect us all in our personal lives and in our professional lives. And your heart goes out to people who are having not only the psychology of a negative situation affecting them, the economics perhaps also affecting them in a big way. I mean, my goodness, is that tough. But the one thing I do know when I think about all of this is that we achieve to the degree that we overcome the negative. That's in our personal lives, that's in our professional lives. It is a matter of choice. We have to decide we can wallow in all the negative statistics. I could give you statistics that are really depressing, from the World Travel and Tourism Council to every kind of international organization. But you know what? It's about choice, and we have to choose to persist. It's fundamentally a core. And how do we persist? Well, we persist by doing things to enrich ourselves in a moment when we don't feel too enriched. I am spending hours and hours on podcasts trying to learn things that I've always wanted to learn because I never had enough time. I'm trying to understand things that I need to understand better. I'm trying to learn and educate myself. And most of all, if I'm a retailer, plug into your clients. Think about how they're feeling. Listen, people love to travel. The love of travel is not going to go away. They just want to feel safe. They want to know, how can I do it without being harmed? So for me, I go into a proactive plan, and it's a plan of human connection, engagement with customers. Use your time not to wallow. Use your time to say, how do I engage and talk about the countries that are opening, the resorts that are opening, the future sorts of things, new exciting itineraries that I see being released for 22 and 23, as lines will try to re-navigate really rough waters, but they will re-navigate it. And in every storm, as I said to you earlier, the storm calms. But when you're in the middle of it, my God, you can't think of anything but the storm. And I get that. That's why it's a change of focus and mind and your daily activity. For me, it's about exercise. For me, it is about personal enrichment. For me, it's about music. Just listening to the music just gets me mellowed out, and a nice glass of wine and a few friends and a friendly face like yours to just delight my day. Why? Because it's the best way to go.
And well, you mentioned human connection there. I mean, it's so important. You've said it's important to you. I'm feeling it as well. I'm sure we're all missing people. But that presumably, when this is passed, when we look to the future, that's going to play really well into the hands of travel, because that's what travel has always done. It's allowed people to connect with friends and family, connect with new people, connect with new cultures. You know, you and I, Larry, we've talked a lot about the destination, haven't we? And how getting under the skin of a country. So, you know, that surely should be something that people will be desperate to get out and do when the time is right.
Without a doubt, they're going to want to see, they're going to want to explore, they're going to want to sample the food and drink of cultures, but they also need a sense of reality. And that sense of reality is they want to know they're going to be safe. They want to know how they're going to be protected. And let's just face a fact. The cruise industry has a high-profile PR problem. And it was created in this pandemic when ships were in the news all over the world. Now today, for weeks and weeks, I haven't heard anything about ships, because this is not a cruise ship virus. This is a global pandemic, and it was regrettable, but the truth be known, ships were used as an example in the media as a petri dish for this. So people are going to need to think of the other side to that. And it's a question, as it is between any two human beings, about trust. They have to trust their counselor to give them the proper advice. They have to trust the lines, and the lines have to step up and be really specific about the protocols that they think that they are going to roll out that is going to allow people to be safe. Now, let me just address one thing about that for a second. This industry has been innovative. It always has been. This is a big problem. I do not want to minimize the problem, but I know that this industry will be persistent. I am a believer in the industry getting to the other side through science, through best practices, that the retailers are going to have to educate themselves on what's happening, how will it be. This is beyond taking a temperature. There are going to be a lot of protocols. I mean, think about this for a second, Lucy. When guests get to a country, is the country going to say, give us some metrics to tell us they're okay? when they get back to the ship, is the ship going to want to understand, are they okay?
Yeah.
So we're going through new ways of thinking of our industry. And by the way, people have to feel like they're not going to be contained. They don't want to get stuck. I mean, the data here, there's so much data about that. Don't want to be stuck, don't want to be in a situation where I feel uncomfortable. But the data also says, retailer, concentrate on those people who already love cruising. The data is very strong about the fact that they're going to come back. And I've looked at 6 or 7 reports that say up to 50% of the guests, even in the second half of this year, as long as they can feel we can articulate the position of safety and trust, that they'll go back. So let's start with that small number at first, not focus on the glass that's half empty and serious, but focus on the serious upside of the potential of guests who already love our industry and what it does.
Okay. I mean, that raises, I mean, yes, you're right. Everybody I've spoken to says we've got to focus on the loyal guests, because they do understand how much the cruise industry already does around health and safety. They perhaps won't be so scared off by those images of the cruise ships, and as you described it, you know, the petri dish image that that media was showcasing. But you know, this was an industry that before had so much tonnage coming online, Larry. All we were talked about was new to cruise. How do we get more people? We only need a small number to move from land to cruise. I mean, you know, you and I have discussed this so much. And now we're kind of saying, well, let's not worry about those people because it's the loyal ones. But I mean, that's not going to economically stack up, is it, for the industry that's got all these ships on order?
Well, you're correct. I mean, the ship orders will slow, if not slow so significantly that it would almost seem, in comparison to we've seen over the last couple of years, almost like stopping. I fully expect a lot of options not to be secured. I fully expect that there may be some lines who say don't want to go forward with that. And frankly, we are going to, this is not months, this is a multi-year process. 2020 is a disastrous year economically for the cruise industry, for the hotel industry, for humanity as a whole. Economics in general, with a few exceptions, are just down. That includes most people's personal economics. And there's a balance between fear and hope. You know, and that's the thing we even see in governments. You know, the politicians arguing with the scientists. Should it open? Should it close? When should it open? What should the quarantining be? Why? Because all of this doesn't have 100% clarity. It's changing. And the industry's response to certain things, in some cases, wasn't as good. In some cases, it had nothing to do with the industry. It had to do with local authorities trying to do the right thing by their own citizens. We were all walking on eggs in an environment we had no knowledge of. That's coming, and we'll get to the other side of this, but there will be less ships that will be built, in my view, that will slow down. And you were right, Lucy. We always talked about not only the repeaters, but we need new to cruising. My own personal view is new to cruising in the early cycle of this is very tough. We've got to overcome the public relations challenge. And that public relations challenge is not just about safety. There are local stories that were horrific. I mean, in my final month at Azamara, there were countries who said, no, it's a cruise ship. We don't want the cruise ship to come into port. There was nobody on the ship with COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, people need assurances, and the world must gather around one concept of, is a ship in, and if there is a problem, is it going to be received, or are people going to get stuck? And so there are going to be protocols, serious protocols that we need to go forward that must be in place in order to allow any future ship to be built, because we've got to handle what we already have.
Yeah, and as you say, it's got to be agreed across all countries, because otherwise you're going to have so many different rules as there were with people's reaction to COVID. We've had one government doing this, one shutting that, somebody else opening. So that became confusing, and it must be hard if you're considering opening up again. Where would you even start sailing?
Well, and here you bring up a point that's so important. I have spent my life in tourism trying to connect people to people and cultures to cultures. One of the most exciting things you can do, because human connection kills prejudice, creates understanding. We learn from each other. But we are going to go from globalism to extreme nationalism. There is a point of concern. I mean, even as the EU countries open up, and Greece says, well, we're going to open this date, but not to this country, not to that country, not to that country. And by the way, while there is an EU, the EU does not govern local health issues. That's up to the local countries. So now we have issues of borders, what's going to be open, what's going to be closed. And that lack of clarity means the runway here is very long because everybody does their own thing. There is an inconsistency of policy and procedures. And cruising moves all over the world into many countries, conceivably, even in one voyage. And herein lies the challenge for cruising that's beyond cruising. It's about the local governments coming to a consistent policy which everybody can adhere to and everybody wants to adhere to. But at the moment, this is not clear. So it means deployments are uncertain. Where does the ship go? How long will it stay? Are these countries open? And my goodness gracious, in the United States right now, we're talking about a second wave. Oh my goodness gracious. So the complexity here is deep, and that reality we must understand, but we also must communicate and get together. And for God's sake, we need leadership. We need leadership to step up in collectively together, or it's all threatened. And frankly, that's not a good positive thing. That's a negative thing.
Yeah. I mean, we've got cruise lines now that have cancelled operations up until the end of November. I know everyone's announcing their pauses at different times, but I think that's the furthest out one that I've heard of, up until the end of November. But
well,
that's
Cunard
exactly
announced that. Disney announced that a little later, in the year. And you're going to see some lines have said that we're not starting till next year.
Yeah.
And frankly, there's some reality to the economics of that because our industry has quarters where it is better and quarters where it is generally poor historically in revenues and such. And so everybody's trying to time a situation that does not have clarity. And therein lies the challenge.
And that's hard for agents because they just get through one set of refunds. And then the cruise line obviously has to, extend out their cancellations, and then they get another wave of cancellations, and it's just a hard thing if you're a retailer to have to it's just quite relentless at the moment.
Well, the one thing is for sure, these high seas will bring low prices and extraordinary value. High seas, low prices. It's coming your way.
And
so
will that last, Larry? Because people are saying that will be they're going to have low prices initially,
of course,
to encourage people to get on.
But why focus on will it last? Why don't you focus on what you have at that moment? That's projecting to areas where it's the law of attraction. Let's just focus on the negative. Let's spend time. Well, it won't last. Do I want to spend my time talking about will it last, or getting out there and telling the clients about what an extraordinary value they have? I'd rather do the latter.
And so when will we get the best prices? We're getting good prices now for 2021? Because some people are saying to me, well, actually, 21 could be quite well booked because you've got all the people who've deferred and taken the future for cruise credits. And then obviously they've got 2021 on sale and they're trying to sort of, saying they're getting some good new bookings. So might it actually be out to 2020 that we'll get better prices, or will it just be?
I think you're going to get better prices until we get an equilibrium of the ships being filled at the right rates, because I can tell you the math of some of the prices, if the lines were filled at that rate, it's not sustainable in the long term. So the rates have to go up. And by the way, the agents also want the rates up. It's about their own incomes as well, and they deserve to be paid for what they do. But somehow you have to have a magnet somehow to get people in the pipeline. And all the data and history shows right now, and this is an important point, Lucy, for all of the retailers, people are going to step out locally first, regionally first, before international. Not only is there ships, but think of the smaller cruise lines that do international deployments. There's usually a very long flight. Well, there's a lot of people right now who are going to stand back and say, I don't know if I want that 10, 12-hour, 15-hour flight. I'm going to see how it goes. There will be a whole population that will be like that, and especially as it relates to older guests who seem to be more affected by this pandemic. So I think, listen, let's take advantage of any advantage. We got enough downside here.
Yeah.
Let's not take the advantage of the wrong attitude and the wrong approach. This is not a good situation for retailers, for travelers, for humanity as a whole. And yet, history has showed us, if we look through the annals of time, that there is always a reverse. The pendulum pulls way out, and then it comes back to a balance. That will happen. I believe it's a 2.5 to 3 year process. I don't believe it's slow. And you referenced next year about being full. That's an important point. We have a lot of future cruise credits that have been out there where people took, instead of having a refund, they took 125% to apply it to the future. God bless them. They love cruising, and they're going to go back and they're getting a great value. Well, that's a reality, but think about it. The cruise lines need the cash right now, which means that they're going to use the cash for cash flow now, and next year they're really not getting any revenues except the onboard. So the cruise industry is going to have a terrible 2020. The cruise industry is going to have a terrible economic 2021, but the ships are likely to fill up, and there won't be as many ships operating. Let's just face that fact. There will be some ships that will sit in the sidelines that won't come back. The whole industry, the whole industry closed down, Lucy, in about 3 weeks.
Yeah.
It was that quick and that fast. There is no way in hell we're coming back in 3 weeks. It isn't even going to be 3 months. And it has to do with your earlier question. When are the ports open? When are the countries open? What's the clarity of policy? And how can retailers articulate it? Retailers can't articulate it because the cruise lines don't even know what it is. It's dependent on all these countries. So this is a serious domino effect. But the one thing that's at the core of this is all of us benefit by tourism. According to the World Trade and Tourism Council, 1 in every 10 jobs in the world is directly or indirectly related to tourism. I will tell you, we have an industry that's powerful, not only for human connection, but for the way we make a living and the way the economies run. Some countries' GDP is all about tourism. So eventually the light bulbs are going to go on and people are going to say, we have to come to a solution, but they want to be safe. So what's the core? Number one item, a COVID-19 vaccine or a therapeutic cocktail that allows people to feel like they won't be harmed physically and from a health standpoint of view. And certainly, who the hell wants to face the proposition of death if they do the wrong thing in the way of social distancing and the rest of it? You know, the countries were complaining about over-tourism to some certain extent in areas which we all began to hear about. Too many people. Well, right now they went over-tourism, like slipped away in about 20 days. All of a sudden they went to no tourism. So now they have the opposite side of that, and we all need balances. Ships are not going to all come in at the same time. There's probably going to be a protocol of who can come in so the terminals are not as crowded. Social distancing, science shows, is real, and we have to be mindful of that. And when COVID-19 goes away because we have a vaccine, I got bad news. We have had other viruses in world history, and we will have others we don't even know about. So we're going to develop new practices to ensure that we can connect, travel, and be more mobile, and everybody's sorting through all of those notions. And there's a lot of brains going against that in the whole world. So in the end, I'm an eternal optimist. Why? Because history and humanity has taught me that that's the best way to be.
Okay. And do you envisage, I mean, Larry, you talk about some of these ships that will not be sailing, they'll be parked up somewhere, that's probably not the right term, whatever the term is, but do you envisage consolidation? Do you envisage some new entrants to the market even who see an opportunity? I mean, often when it's the absolute rock bottom, and that you find some really opportunist entrepreneurs who will say, well, hang on, I might take advantage of this. So what do you think will happen with that respect?
This is a provocative question, and it's a great one. There will be new entrants. There always is, because entrepreneurs are fantastic at looking at the opportunities. And in every downside, there is an opportunity. So I can tell you that there are people thinking about everything you could think of. Having been away from Royal Caribbean, a company that I literally love. I love Richard Fain. He is a phenomenal chairman in a very tough situation. I can tell you on the sidelines, my phone has rang with people who have very intriguing ideas, some of which I think are pretty damn good, and they're different, okay?
Yeah.
Second, I think there will be a few of those. Well, not a lot, because let's just face it, it's capital intense business, cost a lot of money to get into this business before you get the first guest, but that will happen. I believe there is a fair chance that older ships will sit on the sidelines that are smaller with international deployments, simply because the air travel is not connecting up to it. So what are we going to find? We're going to find big ships with local deployments as the first comeback. You're probably going to find short rotations. Out of the States, you can guess and say you'll probably get 3-4 day rotations going to private islands. Why? Think about it. Private islands, they can secure the safety, health in all areas without a bunch of nonsensical politics layered in it, which makes things even more complex and frankly angers a lot of people at the end of the day. So we're going to see local, regionalized. They're going to test that. And they need the big machines and the big companies to come in, because those are the treasury machines. And so people ask me all the time, Larry, what about the luxury ships, the small luxury ships versus the others? Well, there's going to be play of all. First of all, the luxury ships go to places that frequently are less crowded, right from the very onset. And they are smaller and there's not as much density. But we have an issue with social distancing in an industry that was about connection on the ships. So herein lies a paradoxical sort of scenario, and everybody is analyzing everything. Fewer guests on the ship. They're analyzing new things on buffets. They're probably going away. How do we deal with that? There will be new check-in procedures that will be fundamentally very different. I think there will be a use of a lot of unique technology we don't even have at the moment that people are working in. How do we get to touchless systems? How do we get to identifying technology that can identify that person has a temperature without having to do anything? The technology will do that.
Yeah.
And all of it is about a simple concept. We need to travel, but we want guarantees. That's what the traveler is saying. That's what they're looking for from the hotel industry, from the cruise industry, from the airline industry. Talk about density. Think about taking a 10 or 12 or 15 hour flight in coach and the denseness that you'd find on these carriers. I don't know. I'm not doing that at the moment. I'm just not. I want to understand filtration systems. What kind of filters are there? What's going to protect me?
This is quite a departure, though. I mean, agents already have had to. It's quite a complex industry, isn't it? It's a complex sell. They've had to understand the cruise ships and the different lines and the cabin grades and all the different things. Then there's the destinations. And so that's been hard. And now we're saying, actually, you're going to have to add another layer on that. This is going to have to be all the health and safety protocols. And I guess it's finding that balance. You talk about balance, but between, you don't want to scare people off and talk about too many things that might be perceived as negative, because you want to say it in a positive way, something that's going to be encouraging and reassuring. So that's going to be a hard one, I think, for retailers and advisors to get that balance right when they're trying to encourage a customer to come on a cruise.
You are so accurate. I mean, the retailer is a communicator of value. They're value interpreters. One of the values is now well beyond price. It's about safety and health. That's a value. But how can the retailer articulate that if the lines don't know it because the countries haven't defined it? So
Right.
that's why I'm saying it's a very odd and awkward time. But in the end, it will turn. The rudder will turn and it'll move in another direction. But this is not, to me, this is 2.5 to 3 year cycle. You're not going to see, but and by the way, you're not going to see the growth we're seeing. I think this year we're scheduled for 19 new ships. I mean, that's a lot of vessels. And right now, it's like, who needs more capacity at this moment? Nobody. But in the future, that will be there. And that's why I say the value has always been in cruising. It's just amplified tenfold at this point. There are going to be rates all over the world that are values. And I've learned this about the consumer. Once they feel even a little comfortable and the value seems there, I've got my own kids booking out flights because the flights between here and London are so inexpensive in the future. And while it's months and months and months away, they're saying, you know what, this is going to get better. They're going to figure it out. If they don't, I don't go. I just cancel. And right now, many of the lines, as you know, have really flexible policy. And we should take advantage of that. But let me say this to all my retail friends. You are fantastic at having helped us fill these ships. But you must communicate what's opening, what the values are, what the rates are. Don't wait for the client to come to you, for God's sake. Engage the client. Engage the book of business you have. And, you know, people dream, they dream about travel. Find out, ask them what their dreams of the future are so that you can research it, be knowledgeable, and articulate the excitement of an amazing travel world. That's incumbent upon us. So I always believe it starts with self-leadership. What do I do? It's always easy to blame the other person, the other guy, the government, those people. Now, what do I do? What are you doing to make it better? And when you focus on that, it's more positive in a negative situation. We're not in a positive situation. I mean, you'd have to be almost idiotic to think that somehow any of this is good, although good will come out of this. There will be things that will be improved, some of which we don't even understand as you and I are talking.
So now, Larry, you have spent a lifetime probably looking at the luxury traveler, the luxury seller. So how do you think the luxury consumer, and I don't just mean for travel, because I know you look at this in a broad way, how, you know, will there be a long-term fundamental change to the luxury consumer? Will it just be a blip and then they'll go back to all the trends and things that we've been used to before? Or where do you think that's going to go?
That's a really great question. And I have spent a lot of months now looking at every study I could find. There is a lot of studies going on. Harris did studies, Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey, and the Luxury Institute has done amazing studies on what's the thinking of the luxury traveler. So let me address that because there's actually a preponderance of data that's now quite consistent. One is they're looking for things that are secluded in travel, privatized. Secluded is in that unique island, that unique bungalow experience that could be in Tahiti, in some place in the world that by its very nature is not crowded. And part of its allure is it's so privatized. That is a definitive trend. The other thing that's really interesting is before we ever get to that, all of the data points say the same thing: weekender travel. How do I get away for 2, 3, 4 days to do a little test? That's even with the affluent client. There are great resorts in the UK, great places to go on the continent that might be a weekender as a sampler to see, how do I feel about that? I went, I enjoyed, I came back, I'm safe. Now I'm going to do it a little longer. So this is in steps. So retailer, be prepared for localized traveling. One of the most interesting things from my perspective is the fact that there is going to be a conscious consumerism by luxury travelers. What do I mean by conscious consumerism? Interesting concept. Do the brands support locals? Do the brands support proper causes and endorse the right things? are the brands relevant to receive my money, not only to serve me, but to serve the communities that they're in? There is a consciousness that will arise that will be very, very significant amongst luxury clients. And they will also accept this very significant transition in e-commerce. They're going to get a lot of data online. I mean, you and I are here on Zoom like the rest of the world. We're finding new ways to connect. We're going to do a lot more consulting just like this. So you better understand how to use technology. It's taken me a while. If I can figure it out, you can figure it out. But I am talking to friends. I'm having cocktail parties. We're getting together in the evening. Why? Because we desire human connection. And while we can't do it as well as we did before, that will come back. This is better than not at all. And I prefer it over a telephone call. And so we're going to have to learn how to use this. But the luxury clients will come back, but they're not dissimilar to others. They want to understand safety protocols, but think of secluded, privatization. Think of how you are going to define personalization for them. And they have the money to do it the right way. You never, 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 never start out with price. You start out with quality, and you sell what counts to them, not discounts. It's completely opposite. It's completely the opposite. It is a style of selling, and those retailers who do it well all over the world, boy, do they do it well. And we all have to learn how to do that better. Maybe someday you and I will do a class on how to do that, because I think it can be taught. I actually think you can learn it.
We would absolutely bite your hand off to give a class on that, Larry. So I will hold you to that. We can do it on Zoom because we're successful in this so far. I mean, it sounds to me like those luxury travelers, they were already, weren't they? They were discerning, they were looking for personalization, but it sounds like this whole situation we're in now is just going to accelerate that even more. And what you're saying is that agents need to absolutely make sure they're ready for that.
That's absolutely correct. And at last comment, I think, while the future is unknown to me or others or you or the agents or to the cruise lines, hotel industry, or for humanity as a whole, but the past should give us hope. And we should never, ever forget the past. It's the very reason we study history. We study it to learn, and the lessons are there. And yes, this is tough, but be persistent, be tough. Understand that downsides require the opposite attitude and mentality. Do the most positive things you can do. As I said, I listen to music. I love to listen to music. It brings me up. And frankly, I've found, as hard as it is for me to do exercise, that walking, biking is its own meditation. And the amount of things you can learn on the internet today and the podcasts that are there, all of these companies are putting together many wonderful podcasts about learning and educating. My goodness gracious, taking advantage of that. I also believe there's another trend. It may be in the future, Lucy, that times will change and all retailers won't be selling all products. They may be going into a group to make sure they have enough revenue and they get enough compensation back to make a living of it. There's nothing wrong with that. Retail stores pick products that they sell all the time. So we may come out of this also in a very different way there. That may be important for us to consider. How much can we put behind a certain organization so that we can get enough commissions and incomes in to be viable?
So people will narrow, you're saying people will specialize in a certain sector or with certain suppliers so that they can have more, well, I guess more guaranteed, and so that it's a more secure situation to be in. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So if you're in ski holidays, for example, you probably have organizations and ski lodges and resorts that you work with more. What I'm saying is that connection is going to happen more, in my view. So yes, specialization in the sector, but players within the sector, not the whole sector. If you've got luxury clients, all of the big lines have wonderful luxury players. They all do. And frankly, they're all not created equal. We should not homogenize the industry. There are different lines that do certain things just better. Some are specialists in family. They do it better than others. Some are specialists in products that deal with more of the culinary end or more of the entertainment end or more of the destination end. I think we have to kind of match up the lines more and determine more about the customer. Don't just sell the product because it's there to sell. First of all, first and foremost, always understand the wants and desires of the buyer. What does the buyer want? But I think being a specialist, we're all looking for specialists. Right now, if you have a medical problem, I want the specialist. You have a
Yeah.
COVID problem, I like the person who knows most about COVID, not the person who knows the least. It's not a bit different for the consumer at the up end with travel sellers. They want to talk to people with knowledge. Knowledge is your currency.
Okay. Well, what a great place to leave it. Larry, you've talked about hope, you've talked about optimism, which I think is so important, and taking control of your own destiny and your own leadership. I think that's really important. I know people are going to so value what you've said today. We're going to get you back on for that class so we can get some more education to the UK trade. But we're so grateful for you joining us today from Miami. So thank you very much for joining us, Larry.
Thank you all. It was my pleasure. Be positive. We know it's tough, but you need to be tougher than what's negative. And good luck. You can do it.